everyone. Today, at this point, it's actually time to go ahead and put our new test bench together. So as a reminder, we've looked at a couple of these components on their own. We've got a Z590M Pro 4. We have an i5-11600K. We've got a set of 16 gigabytes of Mushkin Redline DDR4 4000, which actually that's going to be interesting with the whole Gear 1, Gear 2 issues with the 11th gen chips. So I'm not 100% sure where we're going to end up performance-wise on these. I may find that like a Gear 1 setting at 3600 versus a Gear 2 setting at 4000 gives me better performance, even though these are clearly rated for PC4 4000. We have the absolutely lovely MasterFrame 700. Our open frame case, which has got a little bit of dust on it from when my video edit rig was in here. And then the one thing that's missing is a power supply. Now, I actually have a power supply available. I'd like to replace this at some point, but for the meantime, what we have is and yes, this is a used component, a coolermaster 850 watt silencer pro semi-modular. Now this is not, ironically, something that coolermaster sent over, but this is just a unit that I've had sitting around in a few different builds and has quite frankly been through hell and back. It's been in some of my servers at one point, but it is an 850 watt 80 plus bronze rated power supply and therefore should be more than capable of everything we're looking at doing. Let's go ahead and grab our baggie of hardware. Oh, and last but not least, I almost forgot one NHD15 Chromax, which is an absolute monster. We're using a pair of those in our video edit workstation. And quite frankly, my only complaint with them will likely ever be that they are just massive. And there have been a couple of times where that was to their disadvantage in the new motherboard that went in the video edit rig. So, that's all of our parts. Let's get building. So first thing that we want to do is we're putting an MATX board on here, which means the standoffs need to go in A and B. So let's go ahead and check our little part baggie here. Which has got some standoffs. And as always, if I can find the blasted thing. There is a standoff tool in here. Maybe this is just a issue with my 3D printed one, having seen better days. Like I said, it's been through a couple of motherboards at this point, and some of which were pretty gummed up. So let's go ahead and try. Yeah, we're not doing that with electric, not like that. All right, let's go ahead and try a slightly bigger electric driver. Yeah, so I think a combination of a few things is going on here. Number one, like I said, my standoff tool has seen better days and definitely doesn't have the ability to provide the torque required for installing these. Number two, it looks like there's paint in the thread holes, which means these are taking a little bit more force than I would have normally liked to see. And yeah, that's all there is to it. Now, they do include this nice little adapter, and you can definitely do this by hand. I don't see any reason to do that. I'm just going to go ahead and do it real quick with my little Tech 4 electric driver here. And one thing they did do, which is fantastic, is this is marked for what motherboard type goes to what standoff materials. We have a micro ATX board, which means we have standoff holes A and B. In fact, I could see there just a little bit of paint peeled out of that one. And then one more A here. Okay. And hopefully most of that was in frame. One thing I am noticing is that these all seem to be additive. And I know for a fact that there are EEB boards that would not use like both of these Bs, but would use a C and then only one of those Bs. So you may have to do a little bit of looking based on your particular board. Overall, there's enough standoffs here for an ATX or an MATX board. You might need additional standoffs for that CEB or EEB. I've only got 2 left here, but I don't see a whole ton that I think would be an issue. Going to ATX. So there is that part. And we're going to set that aside for a second and go ahead and install our CPU and heatsink on our motherboard and our RAM. SATA cable, we're not going to be using that. I didn't mention it earlier, but we have this is a SM951A. This is an NVMe SSD that we're going to boot from. It's been around for a little while. Not necessarily a fast NVMe, but it's convenient. There's our M2 screws. We are going to make sure to put that in the slot that is not our Gen 4 capable slot, since that really doesn't matter for that particular drive. And I just heard a couple of screws rattle around in here. There's those. So as a reminder, we've got 2 M2 slots. We have an Ultra M2 here, and we have an M2 here. According to our manual, which I do appreciate that they included a nice 100 and some odd page manual. Let's check which one is our... Okay, so M2 number 2, which is this one, supports Gen 3x4. M2 number 1, which is our Hyper M2, and originally had this heatsink over it, is our Gen 4 by 4, assuming that we use an 11th gen processor, which is what we have here. But we're not going to use that heatsink, which I already mentioned, because I want drives to perform the way that they ship, not the way that this particular board handles heat dissipation. So let's go ahead and get our CPU into the socket. And that is a whole lot simpler than some of the server sockets that I've been using with, and that is a whole hell of a lot smaller than my LGA 2011 chips. And it looks like that lines up just like that. And out that goes. Let's go ahead and get heatsink on. This is actually one of the parts that I'm a little bit worried about, is I need access to that M2 slot. And I'm concerned that the D15 may make doing so easily a little bit tricky. So we're going to find out really quick here. And believe it or not, this actually looks smaller than I remember the D15s being, although it's not in my way for anything yet. Toss that aside. That piece of cardboard can stay in for a minute. I think, take it back. That cardboard is in my way. So I think that would go on. Well, I'll be damned. No blockage if it's installed that way. Memory clearance might be an issue if we install it that way, which is fine. We'll install it like this. And put a second fan on it, presumably after the RAM is in. So, all right. Let's go ahead and start setting up the SecuFirm. Unlike our edit rig, we actually are just going to go ahead and use the NTH1 that's included with this, partially because I don't have a tube of Cryonaut laying around this time. I really like that they include this driver. And then more parts. All right. So AMD, LGA, there we go, LGA 1200. Actually should use the 115X mounting, which means that we need this. And one thing that's not on this that I wish was included is just some double-sided tape, just to hold it in place while you're mounting it. Because there are definitely instances where you're not sitting quite flat on a bench like this. Alright, so NM-IMB2 mounting bars, which are these two. And if our cooler is oriented that way, these are going to go in like that, because that will allow our screws to line up like that. And then this just needs I'm supposed to put in the IMS P1 spacers first, which is something I didn't have to do on the 2011 setups that I did, because that used these double-sided screws instead. These spacers prevent uneven fit. And then we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. I put that on backwards. It's supposed to go in like that, and now they don't touch at all. Man, that is some tight tolerance. Okay, so there is that. And before I'm working around the heatsink, let's go ahead and put this M2 in place. And out of the M2 hardware, the rest of it can just stay where it is right now. All right. Once again, before the heatsink is in the way, we're going to go ahead and install our memory, which, does it say how to install it? A1, A2, B1, B2. I assume I should go in A1 and B1, but this would not be the first time where they changed that. So let's just, for dual channel configuration, install the same size, etc. Dual channel memory configuration should be DDR4 A2 and B2. What the hell, guys? You just really like to make things difficult. As I mentioned before, these are our DDR4 4000 modules provided by Mushkin, part of their Frostbite lineup. Here's this. I want to make sure that I have the cable freed before I do that. And just out of curiosity, where is my CPU fan header? Is right there. All right, and so I'm going to want to install that just like that. But I need some thermal paste first. And if you remember from any of our previous builds, there's a couple of different ways to do thermal paste, but I am of the school of thought that the line method is the best, which is just going to be to put thermal paste like that in the orientation of the CPU die. Now I'm going to have to take the fan off. And by the way, that's actually too much thermal paste. You'll see that in just a second, because what we're going to do is go ahead and push that into place. All right, so that is secured in place, and it's not going anywhere. But for the sake of the curious, I'm going to take it right back off, because I want to show you what that particular thermal paste application looks like. And as we can see, it has spread out completely around the die, but there's a fair bit extra. Sorry, it is spread out completely along the IHS, but there's a fair bit extra that you can see that's squirted out past the IHS. So that was a little bit too much paste. You can see we got some on the socket mounting plate itself. It's not so much that it made a terrible mess, though. And we got full even coverage with a focus on it right where the CPU die is. And I'm just going to go ahead and put this right back on, since I didn't really do anything. I mean, I didn't even turn it on and let the paste potentially cure at all. We just squished it. Some people prefer just a big lump in the middle. Some people like to put a bunch of dots around the die. The X pattern was popular for a little while. A lot of it really comes down to the CPU you're using. I would not use the line method on a AM4 CPU or a Threadripper chip, since those have multiple dies under the IHS. I would do something with more even distribution, but since our 11600K is a monolithic die by virtue of being an Intel system, that's basically a non-issue. All right, give that a little snug. There is that. And since I like my fans, we're not even going to bother with a single fan config. We're going to grab the second NFA15. And we've got all of our mounting stuff right here. So this one's going to go in. Get these little clips in. Honestly, these little clips are probably the thing I like least about any of this. And these aren't inherently a Noctua only thing either. And that is going to get right up against the memory, which is unfortunately as far as I can get it. And tighten in just like that. Can I lower this one any at all? No, that's basically as far down as that goes. Now, this is suboptimal from a cooling perspective. You can see that the fans aren't quite in line with each other, which there's probably a lot of shadow doing it that way. Let's go ahead and turn it like that. Hopefully that looks better. We can see that the center line of this fan is about, I'm going to say like 3/4 to an inch above the center line of the other fan. So their airflow is not going to quite line up the way you would want it to normally, but this is about the best that you can get on a board like this with a cooler like the D15. And that's just by virtue of where the memory modules are. They're directly under the fan. You could get slightly shorter DDR4 modules, but these redline frostbites are pretty typical, where there's maybe, I don't know, a 1/4 inch of heat spreader above the actual memory module itself that holds the two halves together. It's not like they're twice as tall as they need to be, like some of the Corsair Dominator modules have been. So there's that. And basically the only wiring that I have to worry about on the motherboard itself, for today at least, is this CPU fan header, and then the CPU fans themselves. Now, because this is going in the MasterFrame case, I don't really have a good place to hide these cables, and they're just going to sort of stick out and be in my way. But, I could, I don't know, tuck these underneath the fan itself. If I did something like that. And then back like that. There we go. And now I can only do that because I only installed 2 memory modules. Since those are occupying the slot that one of the modules would be in if I had all 4. But that ought to do just fine. Other stuff. The D15 is really close to where a GPU would go. Now, I don't have a GPU in this system right now, but I will in the future. So I'm going to throw a PCIe card in there just to make sure that it's not in the way. we'll just grab something like this obnoxious USB card. And it's tight, but it clears. So that works. So that was the easy part. Now let's get it on the MasterFrame case. Let's clean up a little first. These are knocked to parts that I don't need. So say the Intel stuff. There's my sticker. I like stickers. Okay, so that basically just leaves me with my bags of screws and the power supply itself, which in this case, as far as the power supply is concerned, because I don't have a dedicated GPU, and this is a semi-modular power supply, I don't need any of these extra connectors, or any of the extra connectors. I'm not using a SATA SSD, so I don't need a SATA connector. I'm going to use the 24 pin for the motherboard, and then I have an 8+4, which means I need these two EPS connectors. A higher end board may have had two 8-pin EPS slots, but we have an 11600K, we don't have an 11900K. And we're not going for any LN2 overclocking records. So I'm going to carefully set this on the power supply for a minute so I can bring the case back in. I'm going to fold that up. Now, I do have some cables in the case that I'm going to have to connect. That's my front USB and the audio connector and my power button and that type of stuff. So it's not quite cable free, but it's not far off. I think I'm going to want to mount the power supply under first. So I'm going to set that there. And this should be as simple as... Have I made a mistake by doing it this way? I don't think so. It should be as simple as sliding it under and then over. There's two different power supply mounts under here. I'm using the one that is not directly under the motherboard, and the reason for that is twofold. Number one, that gets the heat a little further away from the board. And by the way, I slid that in upside down. I want the fan exposed so this doesn't overheat. Number two is that is the power supply that shares mounting with the optional hard drive spaces. Not that I think I need one, but if I ever did need to add a hard drive to this build, since I know for a fact I'm only going to be single power supply, I want to leave that open. So let's grab a couple of these thumb screws, which should be the right size for the power supply. And I ought to just need 4 of them or so. Turn this way so I can see what I'm doing. And yeah, that appears to be exactly right. I don't suppose I can do this with my teeny tiny electric driver. I might have to go in and tighten that after the fact. Yeah, I'm going to have to give all of these a nudge. With something that's got a little more torque than that little lithium driver. Which, for anyone wondering, the reason why I'm using my little lithium driver as opposed to the Warrior driver that Harbor Freight sent out, I ran out of AAAs and haven't brought my rechargeables home from work. So that's it, really, and this is actually what I bought this lithium driver for. So I just kind of went back to using that. All right. so there's all of that. There's my cables. And it should be as simple as starting to screw in my standoffs, which where are my... screws to do that? I don't suppose... I guess these thumb screws are the other half for this particular case. That's interesting. I hope they don't cause any clearance issues on any of this. So basically I want to get, we'll start with this one. And then I'm going to rotate this and get one in this corner. And then theoretically everybody lines up. So now that that's in, it's just a matter of going through and finding an open screw hole. And that's a lot more board flex than I would have liked to have seen. That should be okay. Seem to want to thread in, which is weird. All right, so we've got one here. And then we're back here, which I wonder if I grabbed a buggered thumb screw. Let's just try a different one and see if it behaves any better. All right. And there's one right there. And other than bumping into that little heat sink, all of those fit, so there was more clearance than I thought there would be. Yeah, that's that. So then we've got our ATX 20 plus 4. Which goes in just like that. Man, I don't know if this board is thinner than some of the other PCBs I've been working with lately, but I'm seeing a lot more flex than I'm used to when I'm plugging things in and putting some of these screws in. And maybe it's just because I can see the edge of the board, which I couldn't normally. So here's this. And these just install like that. And then one of them goes like that. And then I've got my front panel I/O. And my USB, all of which is USB 3.0, interestingly. I would have liked to have seen a couple of 2.0s just for the sake of backwards compatibility, since there is just ever so often the odd thing that doesn't quite play nice with a 3.0. But, you know, 3.0 has been around for a long, long time, and I shouldn't be super shocked either. The one that's going to be a pain in the ass, I suppose, is, oh, no, that's actually plenty long, is the HD audio. Has to go there. And then there's my front panel, so I am going to grab the manual again really quick and see if there's a front panel diagram. Front panel HD audio header, USB 3 header, USB 2 header, system panel, which I think is that one. So this is the chassis intrusion header, and this is the front panel header. And power LED plus and minus go here. And then there is no hard drive LED connector for this case. Ground, reset, power button. Goes like that. Okay, so there's all of those. Man, I just don't like the way the HD audio is routed. Can I slip that under the board, perhaps? Just barely. Okay. And perfect. So that'll all get pulled down. And we're just going to use this pre-existing cable strap, which is conveniently located directly in front of the CPU, or I should say directly in front of the PSU. And there's another cable strap right here. Oh, I see how these are designed to be used. Okay. So I'm supposed to do that, wrap this part around all my cables, in fact, working. All right, there's that as managed as I'm going to make it today. At this point, we need two things, a display and some I/O, and we'll be back in just a second with that. All right, so I've gone ahead and grabbed my Logitech K600 TV to use as a keyboard and mouse combo during setup. I've got our 27-inch VOTech panel on the bench right now. We're not going to do an OBS capture on this because, quite frankly, installing Windows is boring. However, we can do one once the system's up and running. I just kind of want to see if the Intel graphics can do more than 140 Hertz with the VOTech panel. And if I do an OBS capture, I'm going to have to use HDMI with a capture device and then HDMI again. That's going to lock the frame rate. So I just kind of want to see how this goes with it itself. Just basically going to fast forward through most of this, however. Oh, look at that. We've got some RGB effects here that I hate. All right. Both my fans are spinning up. Little red power LED. Monitor is up. Let's see if I can get into the BIOS with the wireless keyboard. I've had mixed results with that. Nope. I don't think I got into the BIOS, but it detected our USB device, and I'm looking at a 2560 by 1440 Windows setup screen. Very nice. And we're just going to set this up as 10 Pro. All right, and that was probably the smoothest experience I've ever had starting a Windows installer. I've run into issues before, especially with USB 3 ports, because of mixed support on USB 3 in general. Not bad on the airflow on the D15. I wonder what my temps are. All right, and we are up and live. There's no network access right now because I need to bring a network cable in, but let's just take a look at how things set up out of the box. So our memory defaulted to 2667. We'll have to load an XMP profile. Man, that CPU is doing nothing at idle. 0.93 gigahertz. Oh, that's hilarious. And even out of the box with nothing installed, Windows 10 still using 1.7 gigs of RAM to do not much. Neat. All right. So that's basically where we're going to break this. It's up. It's running. I'm going to bring in a network cable, install some software on it, and run some benchmarks. We're going to feature that as a second video. Keep in mind that this is a build. It's not necessarily a review of either the 11600K or this Asus board. This is our test platform that we're going to be running all of our Gen 4 SSDs and any other PCIe add-in cards we get as our benchmarking platform to replace our still excellent but showing its age 7600K that, well, doesn't have PCIe Gen 4. That was actually the big push, was the lack of any Gen 4 capabilities. This, I have Gen 4, I have access to a lot of different things. There'll be links to a lot of the stuff we used in the video below, and there'll also be a link to the video where I made this Windows 10 installer that I used. I'm going to punch a serial key into it once I get a network cable in here. I've got I'm going to bring a network cable in, install some software. Things like Ninite, which I put on there, aren't going to work unless it has a network interface. And I might get a Wi-Fi chip for it. I might not. I haven't decided yet. I might just run a proper dedicated line to my studio. Anyway, overall, this went pretty well. Couple of issues with paint in some of the threaded connections on the MasterFrame. Honestly, I think that was as much paint as it was just my 3D printed standoff tool not quite being able to provide the torque required for that. It's seen better days and is pretty rounded out at this point. I think I might need to print a new one. Getting everything lined up was easy. Get everything bolted down was pretty easy. The Asus Z590 Pro M worked fairly well. And I definitely want to thank Mushkin for sending in the 16 gigs of RAM. I'm going to power cycle this and get into the BIOS, probably with a wired keyboard, and get XMP set up. I'll put a blurb about that, hopefully over this section, where I can comment what I finally decided to settle on. I'm probably leaning towards whatever the highest performance Gear 1 setting I can get out of it is, which will probably actually be 3600 megahertz instead of the full 4000 it's capable of. And yeah, once I get the Asus software installed, I'm probably just going to turn off that little RGB flare. It's not the worst RGB I've ever seen, but it benefits me none. I kind of hate it. Let's see, anything I'm forgetting? No, I mean, that's it. Build's done, Windows is loaded, it seems to be pretty happy, humming along. Not that I'm asking it to do anything yet, but we'll have a second video where we put it through its paces and potentially get a DGPU, because even though I hooked this up with the DisplayPort cable, I don't think I can actually get 180 Hertz out of the Intel integrated graphics. Although I don't have the Intel driver loaded yet, so we'll find out soon in that benchmark video. Alright, and as always, I want to thank Electrix for providing our opening and closing themes. I want to thank anyone who helped support Pocketables, be it via using our Amazon affiliate links, subscribing on Patreon, or simply watching. It's support like that that gives me a kick to, you know what, go buy an 11600K so that I can make a video like this and keep benchmarking new stuff. And yeah, thank you for watching.